Everyone, my name is Lindsay and you are watching Lindsay Get Adventure, and today we are going to adventure through another Bible story just like we do every single Friday. Now before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little thing about me. I am a hugger, and so this past year with COVID has been really tough for me, especially with all of our requirements to be socially distanced, to just try and stop the spread of the virus. And so yeah, this whole time has been really tough, especially like a couple of years ago, I moved to a new city where I just basically didn't know anyone. And I was living with people that I didn't know, and we weren't like close friends or anything like that. So I found it really tough being completely by myself in a new city with people I didn't know and not having anyone to hug. And it was just like the worst time of my entire life. But I want to tell you guys a story about somebody who had a disease that is arguably worse than COVID, because you have to social distance for the rest of your life when you get this disease. And basically there is no cure, or at least there wasn't back in those days. So we're going to be talking about Naaman. And this story is found in 2 Kings chapter 5, and we're going to be looking especially at verses 1 to 19. Now, Naaman was a guy who had leprosy, and we're going to get into that in a little bit later. But leprosy basically was is this disease. It's very contagious viral disease as far as I'm aware. And when you get it, it doesn't like go away. Like we know with COVID, you have about 2 weeks incubation period, and then you're sick for a while, and then eventually you might get over it, and then you're not really contagious anymore, which is great. And then you can kind of go back to your life as you used to do. But with this, like leprosy, when you catch the disease, it's contagious like forever. From that point onwards, you progressively get worse, and your body starts to like fall apart, and your nervous systems, actually your nerve endings stop working, stop sending signals to the brain, and so you're not able to actually feel stuff anymore. So you're not able to experience the joy of physical touch, but also you're not able to, tell if you've just hurt yourself by like chopping your finger off while you're cooking or whatever. You might not notice until you actually see there's blood, but because you just didn't feel anything. Or you might, burn yourself on the stove, or, you might bump yourself or break your leg, and you just honestly don't know because you can't feel it. It's just when things stop working and you notice, then that's when it comes to your attention. And then also you had this like weird white scaly stuff on your skin that kind of would show that it is leprosy, and that's what's going on. So this disease was really bad, and it was actually in a lot of stories in the Bible. It was one of those diseases that they just didn't have a cure for, and you just had to deal with it for the rest of your life. You had to go to the outskirts of town and either live by yourself or with a couple other people who were also lepers, so a leper colony. And yeah, basically live out your days getting progressively more deteriorated until the end came. Yeah. So we're going to talk about this guy called Naaman. And yeah, let me just read from the Bible and we'll get into it from there. So 2 Kings chapter 5 verse 1. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids, and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife, which meant she was like a servant to Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy." And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel." Then the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he departed and took a whole bunch of stuff with him. So we'll pause there. So just diving a bit deeper into what we just read. The first thing that really jumped out at me when I was reading this was God gave victory to Syria through Naaman. And because he did that, this brought Naaman high status, honor, and greatness in the eyes of his master, the king of Syria. And also, when God gave victory to Syria, that meant that in one of those raids, they brought back this slave girl who ended up serving Naaman's wife. Now, remember with leprosy, you're not allowed to go anywhere near other people. You can't experience the joy of physical touch. And so even though Naaman was this like mighty man of valor, and he was like considered great and wonderful, and he was like a favorite of the king, all of these wonderful things, all of the wealth that he got from his position wouldn't have meant anything to him really if he wasn't able to go near his own wife. Like, I mean, I'm single, and I struggle when I'm not allowed to give my friend a hug, because of COVID restrictions or whatever. But imagine like being married and not being able to go anywhere near your spouse. That would be just the worst. That's not great at all. So I can imagine that this little girl from Israel who's serving her mistress, the wife of Naaman, who, is just distraught because she can't hug or touch or kiss her own husband, and the same for him. Like, they are kind of being like just kept apart from each other because of this leprosy. And I can imagine that she would have wanted anything, any little piece of hope that could come, anything that they could try for them to get back together. And I'm sure Naaman would have felt the exact same way. Like, he's, in a worse way, he can't touch anyone, whereas Naaman's wife at least can hug her friend, her sister, whatever, if she wanted to. But yeah, Naaman's in the worst boat out of all of them. But yeah, as this couple, they're being kept apart from each other, and for the sake of their marriage, they would want any kind of help that they could get. And so when this little girl from Israel, who was full of faith about this prophet of Israel in Samaria, I don't know, like, she must have been so full of faith to be dragged off to another country as a slave and still actually believe in her God that she was brought up to believe in. Remembering that at this time there was a lot of bad kings in Israel. The current king in Israel was the son of Ahab, so there was a lot of false religion happening in Israel at that time. But this little girl somehow knew about the true God and Elisha the prophet, and she was like, hey, you should go and talk to this guy in Samaria. And so Naaman goes and talks to the king and says, hey, there's this tiny little bit of hope, and this slave girl of mine from Israel said, there might be some way for me to be healed. Can I please go? And the king, this is his favorite commander. He's brought him all these victories over their enemies, the Israelites, and he's like, sure, anything for you. Yeah, I'm going to send you a letter of recommendation to the king, so they'll try and find a way to get you this healing, and I'll send lots and lots of money and gifts for whoever ends up healing you. And yeah, we're going to invest in this. I want you to be in your best state ever so you can keep working for me and keep living your life. And so the king sends his favorite commander to the Israelites to get healed, which is very upside down. So another point about Naaman. So we know that he has leprosy, which is just destroying his body slowly and just miserably and keeping him away from his wife. But at the same time, before that, he had a lot of scars on his body. It says that he was a mighty man of valor, and he was the commander of an army. So he had been, fighting in battles and in wars for probably his entire life since he was a teenager. And so, as a commander, he's probably at least late 20s, early 30s, or even later on in his life. So he's got like a whole lifetime of battle scars. And that's just good to keep in mind for later down the track when we read something else. So he had all these wounds, all these scars, all of this leprosy just pulling him apart. So he heads off to Israel with all of these gifts. Let's pick it up in the Bible again. So he brought this letter to the king of Israel, which said, "Now be advised, when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy." And it happened when the king of Israel read the letter that he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Therefore, please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me." So the king is like, what the heck just happened? My enemy king has just sent some guy to me, so I'm supposed to heal him. What does he want from me? I'm not God. But he has so little faith in God. Now we know that I did a little bit of, cross-referencing with earlier parts of the Bible to figure out which king this was, because as we've discussed in other Bible stories that we've talked here on YouTube, when there's somebody who isn't named, it probably means that they're not highly respected by the writer. And we see for a while in this particular chapter that the king of Israel doesn't get a name, but earlier in chapter 3, I think it is, chapter 3, verse 14, Elisha is called in to help with a different situation, and it is the king of Israel, and his name is Jehoram, and he's the son of Ahab. And it says in chapter 14, Elisha said, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, surely were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would not look at you nor see you." And he's saying this to the king of Israel. So he has that little respect for this king. And I think from that point onward, we don't actually hear Jehoram's name probably for the rest of his life, as it's written down here. So there's so little respect for this king. He's the son of Ahab. He probably is just like Ahab. And yeah, there's just no respect for him, and he has no respect for God or for Elisha either. So, so he tears his clothes because the king of Syria is trying to figure, he thinks that he tears his clothes because he thinks that the king of Syria is trying to pick a fight with him. Now, when we see people tearing their clothes in the Bible, in those Bible times, it's a symbol of this deep distress, and even sometimes offense, like a high level of offense. Clothes weren't, as common as they are today. Like, we look in our wardrobes, we have like 50 different things in there. I have 70 coat hangers in my wardrobe. I counted one time. Don't actually have everything. Like, all of those coat hangers have anything on them right now. Do some culling. But I know for me, I have about 50 things in my wardrobe hanging up. But back then, they probably had like 2 or 3 robes. And that was that. They had like a good one, and then they had some everyday ones, and maybe an extra one for working in the fields or something. Now, the king probably would have had a couple of extra pairs, because, he had to entertain all these fancy people, and he had a lot more money. But in general, people back then didn't have a lot of clothes to go just around ripping them. And so it meant a really big thing for you to destroy the clothes that you're wearing on you right now when you hear something that just horrifies you. So that's what's happening there. So now you know how many clothes I have in my wardrobe. Enjoy that little fun fact. So the king Jehoram has no faith in God to even think that Elisha might be able to help in this situation. But when Elisha hears about this happening, he is at home, not in the palace, because obviously him and the king aren't on good terms. They don't hang out with each other. The king doesn't listen to Elisha. He doesn't think that he even exists half the time. And Elisha doesn't really want to have much to do with him either. But he sends this message to the king after he hears that he tore his clothes. Actually, let's read it. "So it was when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, 'Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.' And so then Naaman went with his horses and chariot and stood at the door of Elisha's house." So Naaman's like, all right, this king's got nothing to help me with. Elisha clearly wants to help, so let's go there instead. So Elisha then did something that Naaman didn't particularly appreciate. And he sent a messenger to him saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times," so the Jordan River 7 times, "and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean." Yeah. Yep, so, but Naaman became furious and went away and said, "Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave over the place and heal the leprosy." So when Naaman comes to Elisha, he has this idea in his head of exactly how he's going to be cured, and it's going to be, wonderful. He's going to have this man of God come out to him. They're going to greet each other formally and, do it all with the dignity that he expects. But instead, Elisha doesn't condescend to leave his house and see him face to face. He sends out a messenger saying, "Go into that muddy, ugly, yucky river of this nation that, the Syrians have conquered." And the Syrians have these beautiful rivers, as we see as he keeps talking. There's, what are they called? They are, what is it? The Abana and the Pharpar rivers of Damascus. Aren't these rivers better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned away in a rage. So he gets really frustrated. He's like, nothing is going the way that I planned. Like, I come here, the king is dumb. Then I come to this, backwater little hovel where this little prophet guy doesn't even come out to meet me. And now he's telling me to go into the river that's muddy and disgusting when I have so many better rivers back home that I could wash in that are clean and nice and beautiful. And he just gets overwhelmed with all the stuff that's going on that he doesn't appreciate, and he just turns away and walks off in a rage. And eventually his servant runs up and says, "Hey, master, if he would have told you something that you had to do and it was like really big, you had to go out and do something, like fight a lion or whatever, you probably would have gone and done that, right? Like, you're a mighty guy, you know how to do these things. But wouldn't it even be better, like, because he's told you to do this one small thing, like just dip in this river 7 times. It's not that hard. Like, can you do that?" And so somehow this servant manages to cool the rage that's going on in Naaman. And he's just, he was so offended. And now the servant comes up and says, "Hey, could you give it a go anyway? Like, we've come all this way." And so even though Naaman's furious and he's offended and humiliated by this prophet and by everything that's happened, he humbles himself. He chooses in his humiliation to just humble himself at this point and to obey the message that he was given. And he goes and dips in the water 7 times, and he comes up. And this is the most amazing part, I feel. He comes up out of the water, and he has like baby skin. Like, it says his skin is like fresh and new, like a little child's. So he doesn't have the leprosy anymore. He can feel his fingertips and his toes and his nose and all that kind of stuff. But not only that, he doesn't have a single scar from the leprosy, and he doesn't have a single scar from his battles either. Like, I could imagine, he probably had this big, sword wound across his face and a whole bunch of scars on his arms and his back and his legs and all that kind of stuff. But now his face, his skin is like soft and new, like a baby's bum. And that wasn't what he was asking for. He was asking for just to be healed. But God gave him such an amazing new blessing that his whole body was completely healed and fresh and brand new. So I'm sure his wife would have appreciated just the first part, but now she's going to be happy with, having this handsome, soft-skinned man, because like he probably had like a broken nose and now it's put back in place and all this kind of stuff. And so he's healed so much more than what he asked for. And I feel like God does this for us as well. When we ask God to, just help me in this one little part of my life, and if we're obedient and humble ourselves, not that it's about what we do or anything like that, but when we trust God and when we obey out of that trust, when we are humble out of that trust and that love for God, God doesn't just, give us the tiniest little dregs of his grace and his mercy. He overflows with it and he pours it out like a flood, and it just makes our lives so much better, and like in ways that we just couldn't even imagine. Like, I have so many stories of when God has blessed me beyond my dreams, even though he did give me dreams about it happening in the first place, like in my brain. But yeah, like, God just loves us so much that he wants to give us so much more. And so that's what he does here. He he heals him more than he asked for or could even imagine. Now, in response to this, Naaman honors God. And this is lovely. He offers his gifts that he brought with him, but, Elisha says, like, completely refuses to take it. And the aftermath of all that is for a different story. We're not going to go into that today. But after Elisha refuses the gift sufficiently, Naaman instead asks to take back some of the Israelite soil with him on his donkey packs, so he can have a little piece of Israelite soil to build his altar on to this one and only true God in the entire earth. And this one experience with this miracle completely converts him on the spot. Like, he wasn't sure to start with. There was only a glimmer of hope beforehand, but now he's like, nah, none of the other gods in the entire world are real. The only God that exists is the God of Israel. And so he decides to build an altar to God and renounce all the other gods that he'd ever served or considered serving. And then he also asks forgiveness for, because he is a favorite of the king, and he goes into this temple of some, clearly useless god, back in Syria. And when the king bows down and leans on him, he has to bow down as well. And so he's saying, when I do that, God, please just be aware I'm not there to worship that God. I'm just there because it's my job and because I kind of have to be. Please forgive me for even going in or bowing down. No, it's not my heart to bow and to worship. And when he says all of these things to Elisha tells him to go in peace. It's all good. You're accepted. And yeah, it's fine. So this is a happy story. I like telling happy stories. I think I've told a few sad, ominous stories more recently, so it's time for a happy ending. So yeah, I don't really have a take-home message for you. I'll let you figure that one out for yourself today. Yeah, it was lovely chatting with you, and I will see you again. I will see you in a... What is wrong with my mouth right now? I'm so sorry, guys. I will see you again next Friday with another story. Story time with Lindsay. I'll see you yet. Bye.